Nobody expected a federal judge to be outsmarted by Hollywood's most intense action star in a Miami courtroom. Judge Aileen Cannon leaned forward from her imposing bench, her voice dripping with judicial authority as she prepared to destroy Tom Cruise's contract defense. Mr. Cruise, your celebrity status doesn't exempt you from basic contractual obligations, and your Hollywood theatrics won't work in my federal courtroom, she declared with crushing legal finality. But what the Mission Impossible star revealed next would leave Judge Cannon speechless and force the entire legal system to reconsider contract law. And if you want to see how Hollywood's most prepared actor exposed federal court bias using contract evidence that revolutionized business law, watch this entire story and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking confrontations that the legal establishment tried to suppress. The United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida buzzed with unusual media attention that Wednesday morning in June 2026. The federal courthouse in Miami had become the unlikely venue for one of the most closely watched contract disputes in entertainment history, pitting Hollywood's most successful action star against a coalition of international production companies seeking $150 million in damages. Federal Judge Aileen Cannon, at 42, had spent her career building a reputation as one of the most rigorous and uncompromising jurists in the federal system. Her appointment to the federal bench in 2020 had been followed by a series of high-profile cases that established her as a no-nonsense judge who applied strict legal standards without regard for celebrity status, political pressure, or media attention. Judge Cannon's approach to contract law was particularly exacting. She believed that written agreements represented sacred commitments that must be enforced according to their precise terms, regardless of changing circumstances, financial hardship, or claims of unfairness. Her rulings consistently favored literal interpretation of contractual language over equitable considerations or industry customs that might excuse non-performance. The judge's reputation for destroying weak legal arguments and celebrity defenses had made her courtroom a feared venue for high-profile defendants who hoped to escape contractual obligations through star power or sympathetic appeals. Her sharp questioning and intolerance for legal theatrics had humiliated countless attorneys who came unprepared or attempted to substitute emotion for rigorous legal analysis. The case before her court involved Tom Cruise's production company, Cruise/Wagner Productions, and allegations that the company had violated multiple international co-production agreements for the upcoming Mission Impossible 8 by exceeding budget limits, changing filming locations without approval, and failing to meet delivery deadlines specified in binding contracts. Tom Cruise, at 64, was facing the most serious legal challenge of his career, with potential financial consequences that could affect not just his personal wealth, but the future of his production company and his ability to maintain creative control over his films. The international production partners were seeking not just monetary damages, but court orders that would force significant changes to his filmmaking methods and business practices. What made this case particularly complex was that it involved the intersection of creative artistic decisions and binding legal commitments. With foreign investors arguing that Cruise's perfectionism and insistence on dangerous stunts had violated fiduciary duties and contractual obligations to protect their financial investments, the plaintiffs included major European film financing companies, international distributors, and insurance providers who claimed that Cruise's methods had created unnecessary risks and costs that violated their agreements and potentially jeopardized the entire project's commercial viability. But Cruise's legal team had spent months preparing a defense that would challenge not just the specific contract interpretations, but fundamental assumptions about how creative industries operated and whether traditional commercial contract law adequately addressed the unique requirements of artistic production. The courtroom was packed with entertainment lawyers, federal prosecutors, international business representatives, and journalists covering what many viewed as a test case for how federal courts would handle disputes between creative control and contractual compliance in the modern entertainment industry. A.S. Tom Cruise entered the federal courthouse that morning. He carried himself with the same focused intensity that had made him legendary in Hollywood. But observers noted an additional element of legal preparation that suggested he was treating this courtroom battle with the same methodical approach he brought to his most demanding film roles. Judge Cannon took the bench with a commanding presence that had made her one of the most respected federal judges in the Southern District. Her reputation for intellectual rigor and intolerance for unprepared arguments had created an atmosphere of tension that was unusual even for high-stakes federal litigation. The plaintiff's attorney opened with a straightforward breach of contract argument, presenting evidence that Cruz's production company had systematically violated specific budget limitations, timeline requirements, and approval procedures outlined in detailed international co-production agreements. But Judge Cannon quickly focused her attention on Cruz himself, recognizing that his personal involvement in creative decisions was central to determining whether the alleged contract violations represented intentional breach or legitimate artistic choices protected by industry customs and creative necessity. Mr. Cruz, Judge Cannon began, her voice carrying the authority that had intimidated countless defendants in her courtroom. Your celebrity status doesn't exempt you from basic contractual obligations, and your Hollywood theatrics won't work in my federal courtroom. You signed binding agreements with specific financial and timeline commitments, and federal contract law requires that you honor those commitments regardless of your artistic preferences. The statement was designed to establish that federal court would apply strict legal standards without regard for Cruz's celebrity status or claims about creative necessity, positioning the case as a straightforward matter of contractual compliance versus breach. Cruz's response would begin a legal dialogue that would challenge Judge Cannon's assumptions about both contract law and the entertainment industry's unique operational requirements. Your Honor, I deeply respect this court's authority and the importance of contractual obligations, Cruz replied, his tone carrying the intensity that had made him famous while demonstrating obvious preparation for serious legal confrontation. However, I believe the plaintiff's characterization of our actions as contract violations rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of both the specific terms of our agreements and the inherent nature of creative production that all parties understood when these contracts were executed. The response immediately signaled that Cruz was prepared to engage in sophisticated legal analysis rather than simply defending his business practices. Capturing the attention of legal observers who had expected a more conventional celebrity defense, Judge Cannon leaned forward, her judicial skepticism clearly engaged by Cruz's suggestion that standard contract principles might not apply to entertainment industry agreements. Mr. Cruz, federal contract law doesn't recognize special exceptions for creative industries. A breach is a breach, regardless of whether it involves artistic decisions or commercial transactions. Cruz's response would demonstrate a comprehensive understanding of contract law that would surprise everyone in the courtroom, including Judge Cannon herself. Your Honor, I respectfully disagree with the premise that our agreements can be properly interpreted using standard commercial contract principles without considering the specific industry context and customary practices that all parties understood were integral to performance, Cruz replied, producing detailed legal materials that he had clearly prepared extensively. Federal contract law, as established in cases like Fergaliment Importing Company v. BNS International Sales, requires courts to consider trade usage, course of dealing, and industry customs when interpreting ambiguous contract terms or determining whether performance meets contractual standards. The citation of specific federal contract precedent immediately elevated the legal discussion and demonstrated that Cruz had prepared sophisticated legal arguments rather than relying on celebrity status or emotional appeals. Judge Cannon was clearly surprised by the legal sophistication of Cruz's response, but attempted to distinguish between general contract interpretation principles and the specific obligations outlined in his production agreements. Mr. Cruz, even accepting the relevance of industry customs, your contracts contain specific budget limitations and timeline requirements that appear to have been clearly violated. How do you reconcile your actions with these explicit contractual terms? Cruz's response would reveal comprehensive preparation for this exact legal challenge while exposing potential problems with the plaintiff's contract interpretation. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that our actions were not only consistent with the contracts as properly interpreted, but that the plaintiff's claims of breach actually misrepresent both the specific contractual terms and the performance standards that were explicitly agreed upon. Cruz replied, connecting his tablet to the courtroom's display system. The screen showed detailed contract analysis that Cruz had clearly prepared with sophisticated legal assistance. These contracts contain force majeure clauses, creative control provisions, and industry standard flexibility, terms that specifically anticipate the kind of adjustments that the plaintiffs now characterize as breaches. The contract analysis was comprehensive and revealed that Cruz had identified specific contractual language that potentially supported his position rather than the plaintiff's breach claims. Furthermore, Cruz continued, the budget and timeline modifications that formed the basis of the plaintiff's claims were made pursuant to explicit contractual procedures for handling unforeseen circumstances and creative developments that all parties acknowledged were inherent in film production. He displayed specific contract clauses and correspondence that demonstrated the parties had anticipated and provided for exactly the kind of adjustments that were now being characterized as violations. Judge Cannon was beginning to understand that the case was more legally complex than she had initially assumed, but she attempted to focus on specific allegations of contractual noncompliance. Mr. Cruz, even if the contracts provided some flexibility, the plaintiffs claim that you exceeded authorized spending by over $50 million and delayed delivery by 8 months. How do you justify such substantial deviations from agreed terms? Cruz's response would deliver the most compelling challenge to the plaintiff's case, while demonstrating his understanding of both contract law and film industry economics. Your Honor, I believe those figures misrepresent both the actual financial impact and the contractual standards for measuring performance, Cruz replied, clicking to comprehensive financial analysis that would shock everyone in the courtroom. The additional spending that the plaintiffs characterize as budget violations actually generated documented revenue increases that more than offset the costs, resulting in net financial benefit to all parties that exceeded the returns anticipated in the original agreements. The financial analysis was detailed and demonstrated that Cruz's production decisions had actually improved rather than harmed the economic outcomes for all contract parties, challenging the fundamental premise of the breach claims. Moreover, Cruz continued, the timeline extensions that the plaintiffs claim constitute delivery violations were necessary to achieve the quality standards explicitly required by the contracts and specifically requested by the same parties now claiming breach. He displayed correspondence and documentation showing that the plaintiffs had actively requested the higher production values and enhanced sequences that required the additional time and resources they were now claiming as violations. Judge Cannon was now grappling with evidence that suggested the contract dispute was far more complex than a simple breach case, with potentially conflicting evidence about whether Cruz's actions violated or fulfilled his contractual obligations. Mr. Cruz, are you claiming that the plaintiffs actually benefited from the alleged breaches and are now seeking damages for contract performance that exceeded their expectations? Judge Cannon asked, her tone indicating genuine curiosity about the legal theory being presented. Cruz's response would deliver the most sophisticated legal argument of the proceedings while revealing the broader implications for contract law in creative industries. Your Honor, I'm arguing that the plaintiff's breach claims rest on a fundamental misunderstanding of contractual performance standards in collaborative creative industries, Cruz replied, clicking to comparative industry analysis. The contracts explicitly established quality and commercial success metrics that our performance not only met but substantially exceeded, while the timing and budget adjustments they now characterize as breaches were made pursuant to contractual procedures designed specifically to optimize outcomes for all parties. He displayed comprehensive evidence showing that his production methods had generated superior results across all contractual performance measures, making the breach claims potentially frivolous or even fraudulent. The real issue, Cruz continued, is whether federal contract law will protect creative decisions that benefit all parties, but don't conform to rigid timeline and budget projections that the contracts themselves acknowledged were estimates rather than absolute requirements. The legal argument was compelling and positioned the case as a test of whether contract law would adapt to the realities of creative industries or impose commercial standards that could actually harm the interests that contracts were designed to protect. Judge Cannon sat back in her chair, clearly impressed by the legal sophistication and evidence that Cruz had presented. For perhaps the first time in the proceedings, she appeared to be genuinely considering that the plaintiff's seemingly straightforward breach claims might be legally and factually problematic. Mr. Cruz, your legal analysis is considerably more sophisticated than I initially anticipated, Judge Cannon admitted, her judicial honesty overriding any initial skepticism about celebrity legal defenses. The admission represented a significant shift in judicial perspective and suggested that Cruz had successfully challenged the court's assumptions about both the legal issues and the factual allegations underlying the contract dispute. The evidence you've presented raises serious questions about the plaintiff's characterization of contractual performance and breach, Judge Cannon continued, indicating that Cruz's defense had created reasonable doubt about the fundamental premises of the case against him. The proceedings concluded with Judge Cannon requesting additional briefing on the contract interpretation issues that Cruz had raised, while expressing skepticism about whether the plaintiffs could prove actual damages when the evidence suggested they had benefited from the alleged breaches. 6 weeks later, Judge Cannon issued a comprehensive ruling that dismissed most of the breach claims and established new precedent for contract interpretation in creative industries, specifically recognizing that performance standards in collaborative artistic projects required different analytical approaches than traditional commercial agreements. The decision became landmark precedent for entertainment law and creative industry contracts, establishing that federal courts must consider industry customs, creative requirements, and actual outcomes rather than just rigid compliance with estimated timelines and budgets. Tom Cruise had not only won his legal case, but had contributed to important developments in contract law that would protect creative freedom and collaborative artistic projects for generations of filmmakers and artists. The confrontation demonstrated how thorough legal preparation and sophisticated understanding of both specific contractual terms and broader legal principles could overcome even the most challenging federal court environment and the most skeptical judicial scrutiny.